Heidi Swart is research coordinator at the organisation Intelwatch. It's an NGO monitoring our intelligence services. Heidi, good afternoon to you. There have been various official investigations into what happened 3 years ago and into why it happened. What have we learnt about our state security apparatus and the intelligence agencies from all of these investigations?
Hi, Stephen. Well, if you look at the investigations, I think experts are pretty much in agreement that our intelligence services dropped the ball. At the time, we know that the intelligence companies in the private sector were keeping a close eye on the sort of simmering tensions within KZN. And they were warning our intelligence people in the government that trouble was coming. And it was actually widely predicted through social media monitoring, and again, this is in the private sector, that this was going to happen, although they did not quite anticipate the scale of the riots. So in essence, the numerous people in the private sector did try to warn our government, and they were essentially ignored. What it really tells us is that there's a lack of capacity, I would say, not only to liaise with, inside our intelligence services, not only to liaise with private actors who have good intelligence, but also to get their own intelligence, to produce their own intelligence. And that could be a failure of human intelligence, people on the ground. It could be that human intelligence, that's not your people in communities, that's keeping an eye on things for our intelligence services. It could be that they did actually observe what was happening, but that they were not listened to. But I would say somewhere at the top levels of our intelligence services, there was most certainly a failure to heed warnings, and a failure also to gather their own information and draw their own conclusions.
Unfortunately, in this world, Heidi, when something like this happens, people will look at the failure of intelligence services and they'll probably ask, maybe it's an unfair question, about whether it was simply a mistake, a lack of capacity, an honest human mistake, or whether it might even have been deliberate. And where I'm going with this is, the questions going back to at least 2005, I suppose, and Billy Masetla, about the politicization, I won't even say alleged, the politicization of our intelligence services.
Yes, so we have a problem with cadre deployment. And after President Zuma took over as president, he actually made it worse. The state intelligence services then became the state security agency. So it became one large monolith with all the security agencies and their budget under one super director. And so during that time, there was cadre deployment. It came out during the Zondo commissions that there was large-scale looting, etc. So during this time, the agency's ability to do its actual job, which would be, for instance, to monitor such the large-scale, the potential for large-scale unrest, as we saw in July 2021. That ability was severely eroded. And to today, they haven't quite recovered their ability. That's the one thing. The other thing is, it's impossible to say, even today, to what extent they dropped the ball on purpose. Because we know that their capacity, we know from official reports that they had lost a tremendous amount of capacity, technical capacity, and to be able to address these kinds of situations. But yeah, in essence, it's impossible to differentiate between the two, but it wouldn't have taken much effort from persons inside the agency who simply were not interested, in really paying attention to the problem. So this is what you call, plausible deniability. You just sort of let something happen, but we'll never know. We'll never know what really happened there, unless the agency starts doing some serious investigations and actually publishing the findings of its own internal investigations, which of course it won't do because it prefers to keep everything top secret.
Quite a lot has changed. Well, let me put it like this. Quite a lot is supposed to have changed in our intelligence agencies since then. In fact, some of the important, significant laws around them have changed too. Is there anything that makes you think they're stronger now, more effective now, than they were then.
I doubt it. The big thing that has changed is that the State Security Agency must now be split up into its former parts, which is a domestic intelligence service, a foreign intelligence service, a training academy, etc. So what's happening now is you don't have one super director, making all the final, approvals and approving, holding the purse strings. So there is room for improvement there. But what we are not sure about is whether or not the new legislation will actually curb ministerial interference, because this was one of the hallmarks of the intelligence under Zuma was ministers directly interfering with intelligence operations. David Mashlobo, during the Shando Commission, there was testimony that he'd taken a quick crash course in intelligence and then told, some of the higher ranked operatives, well, he can take over, this section of the operation. So we don't know if that type of ministerial interference is going to be kept out of the mix. And that's really what we want. We need the politicians to step out of the intelligence services and let them do their job, which is to protect our country, not to serve as political weapons and serve factions within the ruling party.
There's so much, you made the point, there's certain things we won't know about the role of intelligence services during that time. And in fact, there's so much we don't know. You may remember the investigation by the Human Rights Commission, which I think correctly, must be correct, spoke to some of the conditions on the ground, the inequality, the racialized inequality in our society, the poverty. This was all during COVID. The fact that this violence was deliberate, it was organized, clearly, it was planned. Also saying that it could not find any evidence that this was related or a consequence of the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma at the time. And you may remember the huge conversation that this sparked. And just by asking you, what do you think this was a consequence of, really gets to the heart of the question. We've seen so few convictions from this time that it's still such a murky picture. And I can't help but feel that that's a failure of, yes, our police service, but maybe a continuing failure of our intelligence services, because they should be investigating still what happened and bringing whatever information they get, if it's lawfully gained, to the police.
Well, quite, yes, that's a very astute observation. I mean, the fact that we haven't had some sort of open inquiry into what happened, and I don't mean one commission of investigation, really an inquiry where the State Security Agency has to come out and into the public and say, look, this is this is how we messed up, this is what actually happened, this is why we think it happened. There might be debate, I think, over whether the arrest of then former President Zuma actually triggered this. I think many things triggered that, but I don't think we can write off the arrest of Zuma as a catalyst. I don't think that's an unrealistic, it's not an unrealistic estimate. So what really underlies all of this is that the people are, like the Human Rights Commission said, they're hungry, they're tired, they are desperate. So all you need are a couple of instigators, people fueling it on WhatsApp, social media groups. And ultimately, what we saw with the riots is that it may have started off organized, but it got sort of gained a critical mass that had a life of its own, where in the end, ordinary people were participating. We saw children running into stores, food stores. People were stealing food. So yes, I think there was definitely a level of orchestration. The analysts that I spoke to, they were convinced of it. But it also then got a life of its own, which is obviously, if you are orchestrating something like this, which is what you want, you don't want to have to do all the work. You just want to give it enough of a push so that ordinary, desperate people will get swept up in it. And I think that's what happened.
All of this, gets to the question of whether our intelligence services could play a role in stopping something like this from happening again. And this gets to the heart of the other question, which is how important intelligence services are, how often what they do is sort of in the shadows, has to be like that to an extent. And the difficulty with that tension between what happens in the shadows and transparency. That's pretty much what your organization is right in the middle of, that tension.
Well, yes, I mean, our intelligence services really, I think, have a lot to learn from other intelligence services in democratic countries. Uh, if you even take a country such as the United States and the UK, I mean, they are notorious for interceptions and renditions, etc. But even they have more accountability. You can go onto the, you can go onto the internet. You can see they've, classified documents they've released. You can see reports before Congress. You can see the head of security or the CIA, etc., defense intelligence appearing before Congress to give a risk estimate, and that's televised. So there are many, many things in terms of security that you can actually release to the public, and that you, in fact, should release to the public, because the public also needs to know what the dangers are, even if it is at a macro level. Instead, we have our intelligence services are obsessed with secrecy. I don't think they have ever answered any of my media questions that I've sent to them in the 10 years that I've been writing about them. It's always, the answer is always, I'm sorry, we can't talk about this. It's secret, so it's illegal for us to comment, something to that effect. So really, they need to do some PR. They need to look around and see what can we actually tell the public in order to win their trust, because ultimately that is why intelligence services in other parts of the world do tell the public or the government what they are doing. And what is sort of standard to put out into the public? What is standard to all intelligence services everywhere? Kind of a standard practice that you can at least come out and talk about. And what is really going to, be problematic if we release it? Yes, of course, areas of exact operation, the names of agents, etc. Things like that are dangerous, but there are many other aspects that they can report on. And a risk estimate, especially, before the riots happened, the ones to have